They called it the new operating blueprint, projected across a 40-foot screen at the annual town hall, framed in bold navy and silver. Dean Rourke stood confidently under the spotlight. Every word he spoke echoed off the glass walls like gospel. He called it our next evolution. He called it an internal leap forward. He called it his. From row 5, I just sat there, staring, silent, still. Because I had seen that slide before. Not yesterday, not last week, but 6 months ago, when it was still hand-drawn in my notebook in red ink and frustration. A 3-phase operations restructuring flow. My flow. Lifted word for word. Even the label headers hadn't changed. Phase 2. Workflow harmonization with time gate triggers. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't whisper. But inside me something twisted. Not violently. Just decisively. Like a safe turning its final click. 6 months earlier, no one knew who Dean Rourke was. He came from a boutique firm that specialized in process acceleration, the kind of man who walked in with thin ties and buzzwords, always shaking your hand with both of his like a promise wrapped in threat. I'd been at Foresight Group for 8 years by then. Mid-level ops strategist. Not flashy, not political. But I knew how the company actually worked, not the structure on paper, but the moving parts between divisions. The friction points, the bottlenecks nobody above director level had time to notice. For years I kept things moving by building quiet solutions. Fixing what broke. Translating chaos into calm. I didn't lead with voice, I led with systems. And one day, after the latest restructuring cycle left half of our departments tripping over each other, I opened my red leather notebook and started mapping a better way forward. Not for show, not for credit. Just because I couldn't stand watching good teams drown in bad process anymore. That notebook was my constant companion, a gift from my brother Crimson Leather, with a brass snap-thick pages that took ink beautifully. By page 25, I had drafted a 3-phase framework that could simplify 12 of our core operations into 4 unified streams. I timed every transition point to reduce duplication and modeled the output against a test group. Results 28% faster turnaround. 0 communication gaps. I'd even presented the draft quietly to our old COO Valerie 2 months before she left. She had nodded, smiled. It's clean, Margot. It makes too much sense. Let's keep refining. Then she retired. Then Dean arrived. At first, Dean played it gracious. I'm here to listen, he told the ops team at his first division-wide. No sweeping changes, just alignment. He held listening lunches where he asked polite questions and took even politer notes. I was invited to one. He listened carefully while I described the friction between strategic planning and fulfillment logistics. He nodded, asked smart questions, took more notes. I didn't bring the notebook that day. I didn't think I'd need it. 3 weeks later, I noticed something strange. A meeting popped up on my calendar Ops Synthesis Roundtable, but I hadn't been invited. The organizer, Dean's chief of staff. Joelle, one of our newest coordinators, mentioned it over coffee. Hey, were you on that synthesis call this morning? I shook my head. Wasn't aware of it. She frowned. Weird. A bunch of it looked like the stuff you've been working on. I thought maybe you were consulting on it. I wasn't, I said. Later that day, I opened my red notebook to check one of my earlier drafts and froze. It was gone. Not all of it. But a section phase 2. Timegate triggers had been ripped out cleanly. No torn paper, no rough edge. Just missing. Only the indentation marks on the next page proved it had ever existed. I remembered exactly where I'd left it on my desk inside my locked cabinet drawer. The same cabinet that had been rekeyed for facilities safety compliance the week prior. I checked the drawer. The backup flash drive was still there. But the binder, that section, gone. I told myself it was a mistake. Maybe I misplaced it. Maybe I'd taken it home and forgotten. But no matter how many drawers I opened, how many folders I checked, those notes were gone. And then Dean's first internal strategy memo dropped. Phase 2. Workflow harmonization with timegate triggers. No mention of me, no credit, no footnote. Just clean corporate language repackaged for executive digestion. The lines I'd written in red ink while eating instant ramen at 2 a.m., after calming down from another cross-department email, wore now declared pioneering innovation by a man whose brilliance was apparently understated leadership. And now, here we were 6 months later, at a town hall where he unveiled the full framework. Joelle sat next to me stiff. She leaned over halfway through and whispered, "This is yours, isn't it?" I didn't answer, but I opened my new notebook plain black this time and jotted a single sentence. Systems fail when they forget who made them work. 2 days after the town hall, my name disappeared from the ops workflow repository. At first, I assumed it was a sync issue. The company had just migrated to a new platform for collaborative efficiency, which meant half the changelogs weren't ported correctly. I sent a quick message to DevOps. No reply. I waited. Checked again later that night. Still gone. All the diagrams I'd uploaded months earlier labeled MLOps Template V4ML had been renamed. Now they read RKey Integrated Blueprint Final as in Rourke, Dean Rourke. And under each one, the author tag listed either internal ops team or inexplicably compiled by Chief Strategy Office. Not a trace of my ID remained. But I remembered the structure. I had built it. Every module, every trigger, every offshoot flow. The next morning, I brought it up casually with Dean's assistant in the hallway. "Hey, I noticed my contributor tag is missing on some of the back-end documentation." She smiled too quickly. "Oh yeah, I think they're consolidating labels for simplicity." "Simplicity?" I asked. "Standardizing documentation so it's less individual and more team-based." I nodded. "Right, of course, team-based." I walked back to my desk and closed the door. Then, I opened the systems log I'd backed up a month earlier. A full export of the old internal platform, complete with time-stamped uploads, version histories, and authorship data. There it was. March 12th, uploaded by mlin.ops. April 3rd, updated flow logic. April 28th, peer review by dev team. Everything was there. My name, my work. They didn't delete it. They copied it, then buried the original. I started getting removed from meetings next. No calendar invites, no recap summaries, no follow-up pings. Joelle stopped by one afternoon, looking concerned. "Were you not in the roadmap planning session?" I shook my head. No invite. Her brow furrowed. "But your phase transition notes were on the table." She looked down, then back at me. "He printed them." "He who I asked." "You know who." Later that week, I ran into Dean in the elevator. He smiled like nothing was wrong. "Margot, how's the back-end adjustment plan going?" I blinked. "What adjustment?" He laughed low and easy. "Oh, must have slipped past. We're reorganizing sprint attribution, realigning contributor logs for public release. Legal wants consistent authorship before the launch." He stepped out as the doors opened, but turned back with a casual hand on the frame. "Nothing personal," he said. "It's just optics." I didn't say anything, but I remembered something my old manager once told me long before she retired. You don't survive in this place by shouting. You survive by documenting the silence. So that night, I pulled out my new black notebook. I flipped past my usual sketches and lists and wrote the following across an entire page in sharp all-caps ink. Phase redacted. Authorship overridden. Source, unchanged. Then, I turned to my old red notebook, the one they thought they'd already gutted, and checked the inside back pocket. That's where I had slipped a slim USB drive months ago, before the rekeying, before the strange safety excuse that made my desk off limits. I plugged it into my personal laptop. It whirred to life. Inside, PDFs of my original flowcharts, meeting notes I'd handwritten and scanned, screen recordings of every major demo I'd done, and one file labeled Original Fee Trace Final V6. I opened it and exhaled slowly. Everything was still there. Clean, untouched. Mine. The next morning, I found Joelle standing quietly by my desk, holding a rolled-up printout. "Can I show you something?" I nodded. She unrolled a large format version of the updated framework Dean had presented. Highlighted in yellow marker were section headers, modular efficiencies, time-gated escalation cross-silo rotation model. She had circled them. Below each one in red pen, she had written the matching page numbers from the copy of my binder she'd seen months earlier. "I don't know how far you want to take this," she said, "but if you do, I'll help." I looked at her. She wasn't scared. She was furious, the kind that brews slowly and smart people forced to play dumb too long. That night, I made 3 copies of everything. One went into a secure cloud folder. One went onto a fresh USB stick hidden inside a bag of loose tea. And one went into a hard mailer addressed to an old acquaintance of mine, Marta Ivanov, Director of Internal Audit and Ethics, Corporate Oversight Division. I hadn't spoken to Marta in 4 years, not since she quietly investigated a VP for quietly using employee designs in a side project and never got public credit for stopping it. She was in every sense a woman who understood the power of records. I sat back at my desk, lit only by the blue glow of my screen and the steady blink of the upload bar on the cloud drive. When it finished, I opened the red notebook again. Still missing those middle pages, but everything else still intact. 2 weeks passed. No one said a word. Not about the missing author tags. Not about the framework. Not about me. Dean's rebrand campaign gained traction, blurbs in industry blogs, photos of him at panel events holding diagrams I had drawn with a red Sharpie and a stress migraine. He had trimmed the language, polished the edges, made the work photogenic. And people loved it. "He's really turning the place around," someone said in the elevator. I smiled without meaning to, because beneath the glow, I had started pulling the wiring apart, thread by digital thread. The first cracks showed up in the version control logs. Joelle, ever the silent ally, had access to the internal backup server. She called me one night, voice low, like we were co-conspirators in a spy film. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "You know how they renamed your document tree to match the new framework?" "Yeah." "Well, they forgot to change the branch metadata. It still logs the root commit as mlin.opsyourID. They just redirected the visible path." Meaning, if someone opens the branch through the developer view instead of the UI, your name is still attached to every foundational file. I started documenting everything. Snapshots of the misattributed decks, calendar records of strategy meetings I was excluded from, email confirmations I sent about each module weeks before the new team debuted them, and the unaltered system export from 2 months prior, where every function block listed my initials. But the piece that mattered most wasn't digital. It was audio. A week earlier, Joelle had accidentally recorded a prep session on her phone while setting up for a marketing walkthrough. She'd meant to capture setup instructions. Instead, she caught Dean speaking offhandedly to his team. "We need to scrub any legacy attributions. Can't sell innovation if people think we borrowed it." Someone asked about the ethics. Dean replied, "Nothing unethical. She was internal. It's all fair game, and she's not going to make noise." There was a silence, then a laugh. "Besides, who do you think they'll believe, the guy on stage or the girl who never speaks up?" I listened to that recording 3 times, not because I was shocked, because it was the first time I'd heard my silence weaponized like a tool. They didn't underestimate me because I was wrong. They underestimated me because I was quiet. And now they assumed I would stay that way. I emailed Marta Ivanov the next morning. Just a single sentence with an attachment. "Hi Marta, thought this might interest the ethics and oversight team. Best, Margot." The attachment, a zip folder titled Trace Variants Confirmation. It contained the version control export Joelle uncovered, the audio clip, and a time-stamped PDF of the original red notebook scan, complete with page dates, doodles, and handwritten labels that matched the new framework exactly. 20 minutes later, I got a reply. "Received. Reviewing. No further action needed from your side at this time." No signature, no hope you're well, just clean, surgical, like her. By the end of the week, things began to shift. Dean canceled 2 public webinars. A compliance review was scheduled on the internal calendar, no agenda listed. The operations portal briefly went offline for routine maintenance. And a new directive rolled out in an email from Marta's office. Effective immediately, all workflow contributions and architectural changes must include original source logs and author attribution at commit. Joelle printed that line and taped it to the inside of her locker. She called it the first honest sentence I've seen from leadership in 6 months. Dean, of course, played it cool. He made a speech at the all hands about elevating transparency and creating systems where every contributor is recognized. He smiled at me from across the atrium, nodded once, like we were old teammates. I nodded back, but when I got back to my desk, a new calendar invite had appeared, one-on-one sync. Ivanov M, no body text, no files, just a location, the audit room. That afternoon, I walked in and found Marta already seated, reading from a printed report. She didn't look up at first. When she did, she simply said, "We've reviewed the logs. Everything you claimed checks out. More than that, your work forms the technical base of the entire framework. Dean's attribution changes were not only deliberate, they required staff collusion and multiple retroactive edits." I nodded. I didn't need vindication. I needed clarity. "What happens now?" I asked. Marta closed the file and set it aside. "Officially nothing dramatic. Dean will remain in a visible role. Optics matter, but he's being removed from system architecture oversight. Immediately." She paused. "Unofficially, he'll never touch a version tree again without triple-layer audit. And you?" She slid a new badge across the table. "Will lead the re-implementation advisory group. Full authorship. Public." I looked at the badge. My name, my title. No embellishment. No generic team tag. Just Margot Lin, Strategic Systems Architect. I didn't cry. I just smiled, small, clean, and sharper than anything Dean had ever said on a stage. A week after my meeting with Marta, I walked into a glass-walled conference room labeled Internal Transparency Session Systems Attribution Review. The name alone was corporate air freshener meant to make something serious smell like strategy. But inside, it wasn't just PR. 4 department heads, 2 HR observers, a compliance analyst, Marta, and Dean. Dean looked calm, buttoned up, still wearing the exact navy jacket from the town hall. He nodded politely when I entered, like I was his peer, like none of this had happened. Marta opened the meeting. "Today is a closed-door review prompted by evidence of misattribution within the company's internal operations system rearchitecture. The goal is not punishment, it's accuracy." She gestured toward a projector screen as the lights dimmed. On it appeared 2 side-by-side diagrams. "Left, Dean's new blueprint published last quarter. Right, a scanned copy from my red leather notebook labeled in my handwriting with dates and initials in the margins. Joelle had cleaned it up beautifully. Timestamps intact. Overlay precision to the pixel. The only difference between the two, one had a corporate logo and executive photo. The other had a name. Mine. No one spoke at first. Then, Dean cleared his throat. "Look, there's no denying Margot's work informed the final product. But systems evolve. Strategy evolves. The final implementation included significant input from..." Marta raised one hand. Calm. Cold. "Dean, your voice is recorded in a session stating, quote, 'Scrub any legacy attributions.' Would you like us to play that now?" Dean's mouth opened, then closed. The silence was longer this time. Marta turned to me. "Ms. Lin, you're welcome to speak." I looked across the room, at the heads of product infrastructure comms, all the people who had quietly applauded Dean's stagecraft without knowing what it stood on. I chose my words, like I chose code, clean, intentional, unbreakable. "I'm not here to take credit," I said. "I'm here to restore a record." A pause. Credit implies ego. But this was never about spotlight. It's about traceability. If we want to build systems that endure, they need integrity in their bones, not just in their interface. No one interrupted. So I finished, "You can't build trust on top of deletion." The following day, an internal memo went out company-wide. Attribution policy updated. All strategy documents, systems diagrams, and internal architecture contributions must retain visible creator metadata unless explicitly waived in writing by the author. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew. The real shift came later. At the next cross-department showcase, I wasn't in the audience. I was on stage. Not to perform, not to grandstand, just to present what we'd actually built and how it worked. Joelle introduced me with one sentence. This is Margot Lin. She built the system you all use every day, and today, she's here to show us how it thinks. There were no fireworks, no thundering applause, just something better people listening, and staying, and not checking their phones. That evening, Marta sent me a quiet message. You didn't just win. You realigned the architecture of how we measure ownership. That matters more than headlines. She attached a link. Internal Audit Library, Case Study, 07, Attribution Integrity, The Lin Incident. My red notebook scanned pages, now digitized, time-stamped, and stored as reference material for new hires during compliance onboarding. The header read, Design doesn't start with a wireframe. It starts with who's holding the pen. Back home, I opened the top drawer of my desk. There it was, the original red notebook. Now mostly scanned, but still heavy in my hand. Still mine. I flipped to the last used page. Blank. Then, beneath it, the faint indentations from the page that had been ripped out. I traced them with my finger, and I knew they hadn't erased me. They just paused the record. But the real system, had picked me back up right where I left off. 3 months later, I stood on the mezzanine of our downtown office, watching the internal showcase from above. This time, I wasn't in the shadows. I wasn't holding a clipboard. I wasn't waiting for someone else to speak the words I wrote. This time I was the closer. Dean was still at the company, but quieter now. Reassigned to special initiatives, the corporate equivalent of a padded corner. His team was smaller. His calendar lighter. His name stopped appearing in headlines and on internal documents alike. The stage belonged to people who built things now, not the ones who branded them. At the far end of the atrium, a new display had been installed. Small, minimal. Just a transparent acrylic stand mounted on the wall near the strategic ops hub. Inside it, my red leather notebook. Open to the first page, the sketch of the three-phase flow, hand-labeled with the margin note in faded black pen. If it breaks, trace it. If it fails, fix the pattern. Below the display was a plaque. Systems Memory Project Exhibit 1, contributed by Margot Lin. Design date February 12th. Authorship confirmed. Joelle had pushed for it. Marta approved it quietly. HR said nothing, but they didn't try to stop it either. Sometimes silence is permission. I was offered a promotion after the audit cleared Director of Systems Continuity. It came with a bigger office, a higher title, a budget I could actually use without begging for it. But I said no. Instead, I pitched a different idea. TraceCore Initiative, a small internal task force designed to safeguard attribution and traceability, not just in systems, but in contributions across the board. Writers, designers, strategists, analysts, anyone whose name might be streamlined in the name of optics. The executive board approved it. They even funded a part-time historian to help log team-based authorship into permanent project archives. Our first session was held in Conference Room 4B, the same room where my name had been stripped out of the framework slides months earlier. This time, I opened the meeting. Let's start with a question, I said, looking around the room. What's the difference between being seen and being remembered? Silence. Then Joelle answered quietly, When you're seen, it's temporary. When you're remembered, it's recorded. I nodded. Exactly. That evening, I walked past the notebook display again. The lights above it cast a faint, warm glow, enough to make the worn corners of the leather look golden instead of old. I reached into my bag and pulled out a fresh notebook navy, this time thick-spined, clean pages. I opened it, wrote on the first line, TraceCore Project Zero, built on what they tried to forget. Then I looked up at the plaque again, at the word confirmed. Not given, not assigned, confirmed. And I realized they never had to believe me. The record already did.